Ok, buenos días. Me escuchan todos y todas, ¿verdad? Bueno, espero que sí. Buenos días, bienvenidos y bienvenidas a este evento especial de nuestro programa Patrimonio Vivo. En esta ocasión es un seminario sobre la infusión cultural y cómo las industrias creativas y culturales actúan en un proceso de revitalización urbana. Como todos saben, este es un evento cerrado. Estamos participando las ciudades que han tenido o que tienen participación en el programa Patrimonio Vivo. Tenemos el gusto de contar con el apoyo de Bob Consulting, quienes son líderes en el tema de las industrias creativas y de procesos de revitalización urbana. Ellos nos estarán guiando en este evento. Solamente para informarles, tenemos una lista importante de ponentes y unas presentaciones muy interesantes de personas y de profesionales de diferentes partes del mundo. Y hemos recurrido entonces a tener traducción simultánea. Para aquellos que quieran acceder a la traducción en inglés, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla tienen un icono de un mundo. Le hacen clic en y seleccionan el idioma que deseen utilizar, inglés o español. Welcome everybody. As I was saying, this is a web seminar on cultural injection and the role of creative and cultural industries in urban revitalization process. We are having this as part of the program Patrimonio Vivo, Living Heritage, and this is a closed event. And the participating cities that we have being represented in this event are those cities that are part of the program. This event has simultaneous translation, English, Spanish, and if you want to access the English translation, you go to the bottom of your screen, there is a world icon. Please click there and choose the language that you prefer. For the organization and the of this event, we have the support of Bob Consulting, and they are going to be leading the discussion. So to start the whole thing, I'm going to give the floor to Paul, who is our part of Bob Consulting, and he will lead the discussion from now on. So thank you very much and welcome everybody. Paul, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Owens, as Jesus says. I'm calling you from London, where it's a pretty grey afternoon. I hope you've all got a lovely morning wherever you are, and I hope that you're all keeping safe and well. It's really a great pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk to you about the work we've been doing with the bank around cultural and creative industries and urban revitalization. We got a packed program in the next 2 hours. I'm telling you, it's packed. We've got so much to talk about. I'll try and keep things going, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the content we're going to go through, but also about how we would like to run the webinar in a few minutes. But before that, to offer their words of welcome, I'm very happy to pass over to Tatiana Gallego, who's the Division Chief of Housing and Urban Development of the bank, and also her colleague Trinidad Zaldivar, who's the Unit Chief for Culture and Creative Industry. So over to you, Tatiana.
Thank you, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this morning, especially in a moment of celebration. I'm just going to switch to Spanish because I believe there is a bigger part of the audience that is Spanish, but you know, we can continue dialogue later on in either of them. Y como estaba indicando, es un placer estar aquí esta mañana con todos ustedes, celebrando lo que ha sido el trabajo de muchas personas, de muchos meses, y de una gran colaboración entre muchas partes. Aquí en el BID me gustaría empezar, y siempre es bueno empezar dando gracias al equipo que ha trabajado activamente en la preparación y digamos, la facilitación de muchos de los insumos y de muchos, digamos, de los resultados que se han preparado. Me gustaría dar las gracias a Jesús, me gustaría dar las gracias a Steffi, a Rodri, a Tatiana. Y también dentro del BID ha sido un esfuerzo colaborativo que hemos llevado a cabo con Trinidad Saldívar y su equipo. Trinidad, como mencionábamos, es la jefa de la unidad de cultura, solidaridad y creatividad. Y siempre tengo que mirarlo para que no se me olvide una parte del equipo. Y también con casi todas las misiones residentes con las que hemos estado trabajando. Eso es solamente por parte del BID. Sé que en cada uno de los países en los que hemos estado trabajando, esto ha sido un esfuerzo colaborativo con la sociedad civil, con la academia, con el sector público y con el sector privado. Realmente haciendo equipo de una forma óptima para trabajar el desarrollo de las ciudades que siempre promovemos con unas vistas a conseguir los niveles de sostenibilidad que estamos persiguiendo. Creo que en este punto lo que me gustaría mencionar es que las industrias culturales y creativas han sido un detonador crítico en la generación de productividad que es esencial para los temas de sostenibilidad que nosotros andamos buscando. Por un lado, permiten el desarrollo económico local que tanto andamos buscando, pero además lo consiguen de una forma participativa, de forma que cada uno de los miembros que conforman nuestras ciudades sean capaces de participar de una forma genuina y única. Por ello, las industrias creativas y culturales no son solamente un elemento de productividad, pero también un elemento de inclusión y una oportunidad para crear ciudades con una identidad única, al mismo tiempo vividas y diseñadas por todos sus ciudadanos. Creo que nos quedan muchas barreras todavía por sobrepasar, ya sea desde el lado de las inversiones, desde el lado de apoyo a los grupos vulnerables, pero también estamos frente a perdón, me estoy distrayendo, frente a un método, a una forma de desarrollo inclusivo y a través de la revitalización urbana que esperamos podemos replicar en otros lados. Creo que la producción de la guía práctica, de la que vamos a estar hablando hoy, ha sido instrumental como un primer, digamos, output de lo que van a ser muchas actividades, y además su aplicación práctica a nivel de ciudad nos demuestra que tiene un potencial y una aplicación de escalabilidad mucho más importante de la que creíamos. Así que, de nuevo, felicidades a todo el equipo. Ha sido un placer y creo que tenemos que celebrar hoy. Y me gustaría también agradecer efusivamente al gobierno coreano por digamos, por la contribución financiera que hizo y que ha permitido que podamos avanzar conjuntamente en todos estos meses. Gracias, Paul.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Buenos días aquí en esta parte del planeta. Muchísimas gracias, Tatiana, por tus palabras, porque la verdad es que el hablar de industrias culturales y creativas en el ámbito de las ciudades es algo que hemos perseguido juntas por mucho tiempo, y el resultado de esto, uno de los resultados de esto es esta publicación que para nosotros nos llena de alegría, y en esta idea del tema de las industrias culturales y creativas, que tú mencionaste muy bien el tema de cómo ayudan a la revitalización económica, social, temas de inclusión social, sostenibilidad, es importante no perder en cuenta las instituciones culturales, que son, sin ellas no existen las industrias culturales y creativas. Por eso la importancia de estas instituciones en las ciudades, como los museos, los teatros, etcétera, que se han visto justamente tan golpeados en esta pandemia. Pero lo que sí podemos ver es que, como en otras crisis, estas son las industrias que se recuperan primero ante las crisis económicas, y va a haber que apoyarlas, y programas como estos, los de Patrimonio Vivo u otros que está trabajando el banco, son fundamentales. Y sobre todo también publicaciones como estas, que son guías prácticas, que ayudan a las ciudades realmente más allá de lo teórico que nosotros podemos hablar, encontrar los instrumentos para llevar adelante estas iniciativas. Aquellas ciudades que han recurrido a las industrias culturales y creativas en el largo plazo, han invertido en ellas, han aportado en este sentido, hoy día muestran números muy alentadores, y esta es una invitación a que otras ciudades se contagien de esta energía y realmente pongan a las industrias culturales y creativas en el centro de esta conversación, y principalmente a la cultura en el centro de la conversación estratégica del desarrollo de las ciudades. Como bien dijo Tatiana, hace ciudades más inclusivas, pero también ciudades con identidad, más competitivas también frente a otras. Así es que la verdad es que yo celebro mucho esta iniciativa, trabajamos en ella desde el comienzo realmente con mucha energía. El trabajo de Bob Consultant ha sido fantástico, y por supuesto sin el aporte del fondo coreano nada de esto hubiera sido posible, más allá del entusiasmo y del convencimiento que este es un tema relevante para América Latina y el Caribe, y en el que el banco está comprometido. Así es que muchísimas gracias a todo el equipo. Yo tengo que realmente agradecer a Jesús, que ha sido un partner in crime, como decimos, pero también a Andrea Ruiz y otra gente del equipo que ha estado trabajando intensamente, más allá también de todos los colegas de HUD. Así es que tengamos una súper buena jornada hoy día, y muchas gracias por la oportunidad.
Thank you very much, Tatiana and Trinidad. And just let me get straight into our event. So basically, this afternoon, over the next sort of hour and 45 minutes, we're going to have 3 sections to our webinar. The first section, myself and my colleague Richard Naylor, who I hope you can see on the screen there, we're just going to try and summarize for you in a very, very quickly. We're going to summarize for you what are the key messages, the key lessons that have come out of the work on the handbook. If you have a look on the chat function, you'll see that someone's posted a link where you can actually download it, but we'll come on to that in a little bit. With the second section, we're going to feature some people we've been working with over the last 6 to 9 months in 3 different cities in Latin America on some pilot projects where we've tried to kind of test out some of the ideas behind the handbook. And we've asked them to come along and just talk a little bit about what the experience of that pilot and some of the insights and findings from that. And then the third section, we've invited 3 guest speakers who are going to talk about particular projects they've done from different parts of the world. We've got someone from Montreal, someone from London, and someone from Bogota. And then all the way through this, just to let you know, we want you as the attendees to be able to post questions. Please, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat function. And then what will happen is that I will keep an eye on that with my colleagues, and I'll pick out questions and bring those into the discussion. So I really, really encourage you to use that chat function. So without further ado, Richard, and I'll tell you one thing I thought I would do, just because it's a good chance for me to practice my Spanish accent. I would just read out the list of the cities who have actually joined us this afternoon, because I think it's important that you all feel as though you've been individually welcomed. So you have to excuse my accent. So Arequipa, Trujillo, Ayacucho, Paramaribo, Montevideo, Asunción, Panama City, Buenos Aires, and Cartagena. So welcome to you all. As I say, I really hope you'll ask us questions through the chat function. So quickly, on to part 1. just to talk a little bit about the main things that have come out of our work. I'm actually just going to pull out 3 key lessons, and I want to come back to these 3 key lessons all the way through the webinar. Every time we talk about specific examples, I want to see whether we can draw out these key lessons. I want you to go away really thinking hard about them after the end of this webinar. So before I do that, I just wanted to just remind us, can we have the next slide, Lizzie, about what our handbook is based on. What we've done for the bank is we've basically looked at over 40 examples of cultural and creative industries revitalization projects across the world. This map here gives you some idea of the distribution across the world. And we've only looked at projects that are effectively complete. I mean, we know urban revitalization is never complete, but projects that have been in existence for many, many years and which you could say, have a visible, tangible impact. We've looked at those. And having looked at all of those at different levels of depth, we've pulled out key lessons. Now, obviously, the lessons will vary according to the political and local context, but we believe that there are some very interesting universal truths, universal lessons that we can draw from. People often say, or there's a sort of myth around that culture and creative projects are organic and the best ones happen naturally. This is a myth. They only happen when circumstances are particular and as a result of very, very hard and very particularly focused work. So let me just start off with a question, actually, before I go on to the 3 lessons, to my colleague, Richard. Richard, you're a very well-known commentator on the culture and creative industries. You've spent the last 20 years studying culture and urban revitalization. You've done many impact studies. You've done many business cases for developers, for local governments, for partnerships. What's so special about the creative industries? Why is it they have this kind of power, this ability to catalyze change?
Thanks, Paul. I think there are kind of 3 reasons why culture, heritage, and the creative industries are really important for urban revitalization projects. The first one, which is the most fundamental, is that what we're talking about here is symbolic activities that all of us experience. They kind of go to the heart of what it is to be human, right? They're key to our identities, they're key to how we express ourselves, how we relate and connect to one another. And I guess because of all of this, people are always interested in culture and heritage and these activities. And so because of that, because people are interested in culture and how culture and heritage varies from place to place, this can mean that it can be used to create a positive image about a place. It can be used to create a positive story about a place, to tell a new story about a place, for a place that perhaps has been associated with a more difficult story about crime or about poverty. So that's the first one. It's that sort of symbolic value which can be used in city branding and place promotion. The second one, I think, has come to the fore really over the last 30 years or so, is really the appreciation of the economic value that these activities bring. And they do that in kind of 2 ways in cities. Firstly, because of the value of these activities in their own right. And I guess I'm principally talking here about the creative industries. And these can now, depending on context, can already make up somewhere between, say, 5 and 10% of the workforce in some cities. So that just the weight that they have in the economy is much greater than it used to be. But they're important in cities in a second way, and that's really the degree to which they act as an attractor for tourists. So although the cultural sector often doesn't capture the value itself from tourists, it's often the trigger for visits made by tourists who then spend money in the hospitality businesses in the city, in the other leisure sectors, or shopping, retail, and transport. So culture and heritage is really a kind of key part of the tourist product. And whether that's in London or it's in Cartagena or it's in Buenos Aires or it's in Havana, it's really kind of culture which drives people to those cities. And I think the third and final aspect, which is much more to do with, if you like, the physical fabric and the physical side of urban revitalization, is often you've got downtown contexts which have kind of historic and heritage buildings and districts, but those kinds of buildings are not suited to all the kinds of uses and adaptive reuses for today's economy, but they are often suited to creative industries and cultural organizations who in fact often want to seek out buildings that have character, that are slightly quirky, because it kind of feeds into the process of their work. So they're particularly suited to inhabiting kind of heritage and historic districts as well. So I think those three things, the symbolic nature, the economic value, and their sort of suitability for the kinds of heritage and historic districts that we often find in downtown locations in Latin American and Caribbean countries.
Thank you very much, Richard. So having just laid that out as a universal observation, I just wanted to just focus on the three key messages I think that come from the handbook. And the first thing I want to talk about really is, what I would call the components of successful creative revitalization projects. And one of the things that we found very, very clearly, there's something very, very important about the quality of the cultural component itself. Most successful projects, there's some element of curation, some element of kind of taste and judgment about the kinds of activities you have, as you'd expect. There's a very important aspect about critical mass, just the sheer proportion of creative activities. But the thing that I would really like to stress today as part of this discussion is just the importance of the integration of the culture and creative element into the wider plan, into the wider set of activities that are going on. All of the really successful projects we looked at are very much part of wider plans involving infrastructure, public realm, transport, social amenities. And I think when we come and look at our examples for our pilots and later on our guest speakers, that's going to come out very, very clearly. The second thing I just wanted to emphasize was around what we call in English the enabling environment, which is the next slide. And what I really wanted to stress there was that all the projects we've looked at that have been sustainable and successful have a combination of top-down and bottom-up activities. So the city and the developer and the partners use the financial, planning, and regulatory powers that are available to them at the top level, but there's also a lot of work that goes on with businesses, local communities that recognize that culture and creative industries are actually an ecosystem that needs to be tended as an ecosystem. And just being able to work in those two ways together to capture and to share value is hugely important. And then thirdly, just something about the approach. And the way I would summarize that is to say that all successful projects have a big vision, sometimes a very elaborate strategy, but within that, you have to have a lot of tactical flexibility. You have to be able to chop and change and move in a very nimble way through the course of time. And very often that flexibility requires you to have special vehicles or to create a special set of organizations or networks to deliver that. So I'm hoping that these three key messages, these three key learnings will come out of our discussions. But before I hand over to my colleagues to talk a little bit about the work we've done in our pilot cities, I just wanted to add another line of analysis, which is hopefully we can weave all the way through today, which is really about the crisis that we find ourselves in now. And Tatiana and Trinidad have both mentioned this, so I don't need to define this in any way, but clearly the impact of the crisis on the culture and creative industries has been incredibly hard felt. I mean, the figures are terrifying when you look at, just the amount of revenue that's been lost. I think in most of the countries we work in, or the cities we work in at the moment, we're talking about, 60, 70, some 80% loss of revenue in these months, which of course is devastating. So one of the things that we've done in the new edition of the handbook, which is being launched today, is we've just tried to reflect on this for the field of creative industries and revitalization. And we've summarized it in basically 6 very, very simple principles, if you like, that people who are involved need to take into account. And I'm not going to go through all 6 of them right now. They're on that slide there. I just wanted to emphasize 3 of them right now. The first is, I think, the issue of collaboration and sharing knowledge at a local level has always been very, very important for culture and creative industries in the urban context. I think now even more important. An ecosystem is only as strong as the individual links between the elements. And I think that's something that's really, really important. Everywhere you'll see, in every city around the world, you'll see a new level of collaboration taking place between individual businesses, between associations, between governments and business. That's a hugely important thing. The second thing I would emphasize is really about the drive for innovation. The crisis is really going to make us think very hard about how art and creativity are presented, how they interact with the public, has a spatial element, it has a business element. And I think we can be confident, actually, that our artistic and creative communities are really going to step up to that challenge. We haven't got time to go into detail right now, but later on, I think some of our guest speakers will talk about some of the very interesting thinking that's behind what museums are doing, what individual artists are doing. And I think there's a lot we can learn from each other on that. And then finally, and I think this is a hugely important issue, so much of what happens in the next year, 2 years is going to be about consumer confidence. It's going to be about the confidence of the public, of the people who actually make these things work in the end, and how they think about risk, how they think about safety. And there's so much that needs to be done by developers, by artists, by the people who are involved in revitalization projects to signal to the consumers that they're going to be safe, or that they can still have a satisfying experience, and that their safety, if you like, can be managed. So I'm going to finish there. That's basically a kind of an attempt, very, very condensed attempt to kind of summarize what's the meat of the handbook that we're speaking about. And now is a chance for us to expand the discussion and to just share with you the learnings from the work we've been doing with 3 different cities, Paramaribo, Panama, and Ayacucho over the last 9 months or so. Basically, what we were asked to do by the bank was to take some of the thinking that we developed in the handbook and test it out in a particular context. I just wanted to stress to everybody that we've called them pilots. These are not projects that have been implemented. What we've done is we've simply had field trips where we've had discussions with local stakeholders and looked at plans and strategies and sort of opened up discussions about future possibilities, but within the context of the lessons of the handbook. So I think the way we're going to do this section is one of my colleagues is basically going to have a conversation with a champion from the relevant city. I think the order is Panama, Paramaribo, Ayacucho, I think that's right. And we're very pleased to have 3 really interesting guest speakers. And they actually represent quite an interesting cross-section. We have someone from the private sector, which is Duncan Brunings from Paramaribo. We have someone from the public sector, Maru Galvez, who's from the Ministry of Culture in Panama, and then someone who's more from civil society, which is Nadia Mendoza. So I'm going to hand over now to Adriana Rouanet, who's going to talk with Maru Galvez a little bit about the experience in Panama City.
Hi there, lovely to meet you all. Can you hear me?
You can.
Great. Maru, if you can please unmute your microphone.
Hi, hello, I'm here, yes.
So I'm going to do this discussion in English. Yo hablo español, pero es en español de brasileña. Entonces I'm going to spare you all the the mortification of a Brazilian speaking your beautiful language and switch to English. I just wanted to introduce you all to Maru, who works for the Ministry of Culture, and she's our champion in Panama. I was one of the consultants with BOP, together with my colleague Donald Hislop, who's also going to be presenting later, and another colleague who's not with us at the moment, Lucy Mignot. And we had the privilege of going to Panama and visiting several of the exciting projects that are ongoing already that the Ministry of Culture are doing. And I wanted to interview and ask Maru some questions about just generally in terms of how things were before we arrived, Maru. I know that the focus now in light of a pandemic is always, you know, what's happening now in culture with the pandemic happening. But before we go to that, I'd like to begin with how the pilot began. When we came to you in November 2019, we had a focus, and the focus was to assess what potential role cultural tourism and the creative economy could exert in Panama, and how we could use existing assets like the Marta, the Museo de Antropología Reina Torres de Panama, how we could use the Marta building that's been closed for many years if it received IDB funding, and that IDB funding could help revitalize the center with the local community, whether Marta and a subsequent cultural center, Recreartes, could be the hubs for a new creative district connecting the old town of Panama City. So I'd like to start by asking you, Maru, when we arrived, what was the challenge that Panama was facing culturally in terms of its creative industry? Can you tell us what was already in place and what were the big challenges that were facing you?
Well, the biggest challenge was that the Ministry of Culture was just recently created by the time that we met back in November. The ministry was created on August 15, 2019. So we were only starting as an institution to get the platform and to elevate the politics, the politics policy that we need in order to have and create these creative districts that we want to have as plan of the government, as a promise of our current president too. In that moment when we met, we were on the starting the licitation to renovate the Marta, that is the museum, that it will be in the center of this new creative district. And the idea is to how Marta will be part of the community, will be that center, that museum, a living museum. So it will become the center of that patrimonio vivo, that right now, we only consider the historic center one of those neighborhoods, and the idea is to integrate 4 of those neighborhoods that are surrounding the Marta, or only 5 minutes walking distance from the museum. And also not only Marta, but also trying to determine if we have other infrastructures in the area that will be able to use as part of this creative district. Actually, 2 days ago, on Monday, I did a presentation to the Minister of Education, because we have one school here in the Chorrillo. You can see where it says El Chorrillo. There's a school that is actually is a patrimony building. It has over 3 hectares of land space. And right now the building is subutilizado, está subutilizado, because it's all. Sí, ahora mismo solamente la escuela tiene una capacidad, hasta para 3.000 estudiantes, pero en este momento el espacio está subutilizado y es una escuela que está, está totalmente abandonada. Y una de las cosas que le presentamos a la ministra de Educación casualmente el lunes pasado es ver no solamente cómo integrando Marta como un centro para este distrito creativo, sino esta escuela podría ser la primera escuela que tenga esa dualidad de ser una escuela pública, pero también ese espacio que está subutilizado en este momento pueda ser un centro de industrias creativas y culturales. porque está exactamente al lado de Barraza, que son los edificios en el Chorrillo que concentran aproximadamente unas 11.000 viviendas y son de los barrios más vulnerables que tiene la ciudad y el centro urbano de Panamá. Entonces la idea de esto es tratando de ver cómo podemos no solamente integrar lo que ya se conoce como San Felipe, como lo ven en el mapa, que es la parte del centro histórico, pero cómo integramos el Chorrillo, que es el barrio más vulnerable del centro urbano de Panamá, y Santana, a través del museo que se encuentra más cerca de Santana, pero también de esta escuela que se encontraría en el Chorrillo y fuera nuestro primer centro de industrias creativas y culturales en un barrio vulnerable para el rescate de esas personas que viven en el barrio actualmente.
Okay, and Maru, can you please tell me, when Bob came, when the consultants came, we did a series of workshops with local stakeholders. We met with artists, we met with government, both on a municipal and federal level. What were your reactions to our findings and the work that Bob did?
Well, definitivamente las reacciones y el feedback que recibimos después de los talleres que realizamos con ustedes fue muy enriquecedor, sobre todo porque pudimos detectar que la mayoría del sector cultural y creativo del área lo que más necesita son espacios creativos. Esa fue la primera, creo que ese fue el primer insumo que pudimos detectar, que todos al final, mucho de este sector creativo y cultural que ahora se encuentra en Santana y el Chorrillo empezó en San Felipe. Empezó en San Felipe hace 15 años atrás, antes que empezara la restauración del centro histórico. Una vez empezó la inversión en el centro histórico, comenzaron a salir del sector creativo y cultural porque no podían pagar ni las rentas ni la parte inmobiliaria para poder mantenerse ahí. O sea que lo que trajo la luz de todo el mundo querer ver a San Felipe, que fue el sector creativo y cultural, que fue el primero que llegó hace 20 años, tuvo que salir gracias a la gentrificación que se dio por la luz que ellos le dieron al distrito creativo. Y es exactamente lo que no queremos que pase ahora en Santa Ana y el Chorrillo, que ahora todo el sector creativo y cultural tuvo que irse hacia el área de Santa Ana, escapando de los altos costos inmobiliarios, y ahora que está todo el sector de inversión mirando hacia esta área, por supuesto porque está creciendo el centro histórico hasta esos nuevos barrios, ahora también ellos están temiendo que pase lo mismo, que no tengan estos espacios creativos para poder no solamente crear, exponer, pero también poder mercadear sus bienes y servicios culturales. Y es por eso que nosotros estamos trabajando en que debemos crear estos espacios, que no solamente sea el Museo Marta Reina Torres de Araúz, pero identificar dentro del Chorrillo y Santa Ana lugares que puedan servir como laboratorios, como espacios creativos, no solamente para poder dar la capacitación, crear y consolidar este sector, pero que también ellos tengan ese espacio para que después puedan exponer y comercializar sus bienes y servicios, sobre todo a través de ese turismo cultural que sabemos que ya San Felipe está recibiendo más de 400.000 turistas al año. Sabemos que post-COVID esto va a ser un reto, pero igual siempre va a ser el lugar de más visitas de turistas a nivel de la ciudad de Panamá. Entonces necesitamos también que esos creativos no solamente tengan espacios para crear, pero que también tengan espacios para exponer y poder mercadear sus bienes y servicios culturales una vez que estos turistas regresen, porque sabemos que regresarán, ¿no?
Mm-hmm. One of the interesting things we found when we visited Maru among the initiatives is that you already had an ongoing initiative, which you told us about, of creating a digital platform in order to aggregate different initiatives as a meeting place, as a hub that would not only happen physically in Marta and the Recreartes and potentially the school that you mentioned, but also a digital platform where you were beginning to invite artists and create the space for artists and people in the local community to connect, and people who also are in the creative industries. In light, this was before COVID and the pandemic. So my question to you is, how has this digital platform adapted to the crisis, to the COVID crisis, and how have you taken the opportunity to go digital even further now because of the pandemic? So in other words, how has your response to the pandemic been in Panama in terms of preserving some of the findings from the report?
Sí, yo creo que lo que nos ha hecho el COVID es acelerar todos estos planes, así que este plan de crear una plataforma digital del Ministerio de Cultura para el sector creativo y cultural de las industrias creativas y culturales, por supuesto, se aceleró. Entonces, lo que pensábamos hacer probablemente bien planificado, con tiempo para lanzar en el 2021, estamos preparando para lanzarlo en el cuarto trimestre de este año. No solamente va a ser una plataforma para darle visibilidad al sector, sino también con una biblioteca de toda la oferta de los sectores, pero también va a tener un marketplace para que las personas puedan, los emprendedores creativos puedan exponer y puedan comercializar sus productos no solamente a nivel de Panamá, pero también a nivel internacional. Casualmente, mañana estamos firmando un convenio con la Autoridad de Innovación de Panamá, donde estamos negociando ya con plataformas internacionales como Mercado Libre, Encuentra 24 y otras más, para que los emprendedores creativos de Panamá puedan subir sus catálogos y productos pagando tarifas diferenciadas y especiales al ser emprendedores creativos y artesanos del Ministerio de Cultura. Entonces, todas estas iniciativas que antes estaban más para planificar y ejecutar a un mediano plazo, lo que hemos hecho es acelerarlas para empezar las iniciativas y ejecutarlas ahora en este trimestre y las últimas en el último trimestre de este año. Adicional a eso, también ya empezamos a hacer ferias digitales para los artesanos para que empiecen a comercializar sus productos y hemos logrado más de $250,000 en ventas en los últimos 2 meses para el sector.
Gracias, Maru. Paul, did you want to move on? Or we...
Great, thank you, Adriana and Maru. Thank you for that. I
Gracias,
think
Maru.
we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about sort of COVID responses. So that's quite a good little introduction. And I think you're right about the fact that this crisis has accelerated lots of things that are happening already. One thing I would also say is that what Maru's just described there is a classic problem of revitalization, isn't it? The problem of gentrification. How the revitalization process itself pushes out the potential contribution of culture and creative industries. And if you look at the handbook in detail and look at the case studies and the advice and the guidance there, you'll see that there's very, very strong advice around the role that city authorities can play, try and manage that process, but also the huge importance of involving local communities and businesses, local businesses, channels of communication, and as Maru's saying, they're making sure that there's space for them to create and to trade. Anyway, so I'm now going to hand over to our next example, which is Paramaribo, and I'm going to hand over to Paul Burdenshaw, who's going to be talking to Duncan. Paul.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to introduce this project we're doing in Paramaribo in Suriname, and to help me do that with me is Duncan Prunings, who is a native of Suriname and Paramaribo, who has been involved as a manager in national businesses and also local businesses in Paramaribo, and is on the board of a local cultural organisation, the Elizabeth Sampson House, which celebrates the life of Elizabeth Sampson, who was the first Black female millionaire in all the Americas. So we're going to go through the project of what we did there, but I wanted to ask Duncan to begin with by introducing the area of Paramaribo and its historic core, and perhaps he could share with everyone, for him, what makes the area special. It's a World Heritage Site that has unique architecture combining the European and South American culture. So I wanted Duncan to share with everyone what makes it special for him and how he's seen the use of the area change over time.
Well, yes, thank you, Paul, and hi, everyone. Well, Paramaribo is very unique, I think, as a city in the Caribbean and certainly Latin America, in that its old cultural center was built completely in wood. Most of your cities in Latin America will be built in stone, perhaps with brick stones as well. But this city was constructed entirely of wood. There are a couple of buildings that were actually built in bricks, but most of the buildings are indeed wood. And the city downtown is very homogeneous in its looks. And that came about as a result of two great fires that took place in 1821 and 1832. These two fires together leveled about 3/4 of the full city And as a result, the city virtually had to be rebuilt completely from scratch. And you can imagine that the same set of designers and craftsmen were involved in that, and they would be implementing the prevailing tastes of the time. I absolutely love the old buildings because of their very clean lines. They're very symmetrical, and you will always see the traditional colors being used: wood for the walls, green, dark green for the windows and the doors, and you will also have red bricks on the underside. Now, Paramaribo being the capital of Suriname, has always been a city with a mix of usages. Of course, you had the great governmental buildings, the public offices, and you had businesses, great and small, within the town. But up to the 1950s, there were also many people living in the downtown area. But that started to change over the 1960s and 1970s. People started moving to living areas, urban areas outside of the city, and that was governmental policy. And that took place over the 60s and 70s. And so as a result of that, nowadays, Paramaribo is very, very busy and crowded during the daytime, but in the afternoons, it just completely dies down. In the evenings, it is deserted. And that's really a pity, because the city has a beauty, as you can see from the photographs, that lends itself very well to other usages outside of business hours, recreational usages, and just simple adoration of the beauty of the buildings.
Right. Yeah, and I was lucky enough myself to visit Paramaribo back in January with the Bob team and IDB team. And while we were there, we held workshops with local businesses, particularly in one area of the historic core called Herenstraat, where there's a lot of beautiful buildings and active businesses. You can see it on the image there. And the idea of these workshops was to explore how local businesses in that area could cooperate amongst themselves to bring positive change to the area, to make changes that they wanted to see in their own neighborhood, and work with city and national authorities to do so. So, Duncan, what for you were the kind of main impacts of those workshops? What were you and other businesses able to get out of them and be able to contribute to making this area of the city thrive again?
Yeah, a very fortunate development over the past few years has been that a lot of the appreciation, if you will, for old Paramaribo and the old architecture, a lot of that appreciation has increased over the years. And you've seen many businesses taking responsibility and restoring properties, maintaining their properties quite well. And also there's been some exploration, some initiatives to put all of these properties to new alternative uses. But really up to now, there's been very little collective action. And so that was the great benefit of these workshops. Is that, the project really provided a starting point for dialogue between these diverse groups of people currently living and working in the Herenstraat area, which is the central part that we just saw on the slides. It is really an area of town that that very well captures the beauty of the traditional architecture, and it's sort of like an artery, an architectural artery within the city. So, but there was very little collaboration up to now. Now this project has started a dialogue, and it's brought a diverse group of people together that hadn't happened before. I must say that in our city, people really have very little experience in working together in these types of projects. So I think that this project is a good pilot for us to experiment, to gain experience in collaboration. And it's also a good experience, a good environment to become actors for change, to feel how that actually takes place. And so during the workshops, we actually, for the first time, drew up very concrete plans. We identified projects, for example, to improve the lighting of the streets, to illuminate the buildings so that even at night they can be admired for their beauty. There are plans for improving the signage to provide for storytelling about the buildings, about the families that live there. Improvement of accessibility to pedestrians, have more pedestrian areas, have reduced elevation levels, etc. And we believe that as we execute these projects, that together we will gain confidence. We'll be able to also overcome some skepticism by other locals and hopefully bring them aboard as well, because there is some skepticism with great projects because of previous failures. But I think as we progress with these activities, some of that skepticism can be overcome.
Fantastic. Yeah, in those workshops, a lot of energy and ideas from local businesses and other organizations, which are able to contribute to a kind of new vision of what that area could be. And I know you're involved with the Elizabeth Sampson House, a planned museum in the area to celebrate Elizabeth Sampson, an 18th century businesswoman, as I was saying earlier. So while we don't have time to go into all the different plans for the area, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about this museum and property as an example of the kind of change you want to see, and how kind of culture and creative industries can be part of that change that you want to see.
Well, as you can see from the photographs, it's quite a grand house. No? Elizabeth Sampson was a very rich woman, and she indeed constructed a beautiful and very opulent dwelling. The idea is sustainability. So we've decided on a mix of revenue generating activities. Within that big building, we'll have two small museums, one dedicated to her life and work, and one dedicated to the development of labor in Suriname, because up to recently, the Ministry of Labor was housed in this building. There'll also be an event space, which will generate revenue. And the third floor will actually rent out as offices that will generate revenue as well. Also in the basement, a restaurant will be housed. So because of these choices, which are a mix of business and culinary activities and museums, I think we tie in very well to the rest of the neighborhood, and will contribute to the vibrancy of the neighborhood, together with, of course, the other businesses that are located there.
Great, exactly. And I think the first step in doing that has been the communication between the businesses to try and understand the different needs locally, and that has been important under COVID as well, this kind of communication between the businesses and between them and the government. Just on kind of end on that as a way of kind of how we begin, how we're seeing this project begin, is that digital communication between the businesses and authorities to kind of drive this change, including the Elizabeth Sampson House we're seeing here.
Okay, thanks very much, Paul and Duncan. I see we've got a question coming through in Spanish from Javier Edwards, which I'll ask my colleagues to translate, and I'll try and integrate that into chat. But I just wanted to emphasize a couple of really important points that came out of that exchange. Number one is just, most successful creative projects, they're multi-dimensional and multifaceted. They have many, many different parts to them, and that's part of the secret of their sustainability. And I also think, you can just see from the images there, almost all the projects we looked at across the world have a very strong kind of public realm element. So that idea of kind of, creating a vibrant, safe public realm as the kind of core, really, the core requirement of everything else, I think, is something that came out again and again. I wanted to ask Duncan, before we move on to Ayacucho, Duncan, just one quick question. I mean, you're here representing the private sector, if you like, in this discussion. And you mentioned, the previous difficulties in engaging the private sector and some of the skepticism. What's the secrets for these sorts of schemes? What's the secret to getting long-term, embedded, close relationship with all the different parts of the private sector in an area or in a city?
Well, actually, my experience has been that it's just starting the conversation, inviting government officials to, for example, the presentation, and actually engage with them. And my experience so far has been that once you indeed get a hold of someone, invite them to your presentation, and start talking, you know, most doors just open up. There's this general idea, this general skepticism that nothing comes from governments. Well, that has not been my experience. I mean, there are actually people working in government that are very engaged as well. They are people that want to do a good job, people that want to contribute. And as you start the conversation, you'll see that they will do their utmost to make whatever resources are available, make them available to your project. So I would say that the key is just overcome any skepticism and start conversations with the government officials. Okay,
thank you for that. I can now read the very good question that's come in from the audience about, it's actually a massive question about, you know, given what's happening with tourism globally, how does a hyper-local strategy in a sense kind of replace the lost revenue is kind of one of the questions there. I'm going to bring that question into play with our panel a bit later, but maybe Duncan, if you can see that question, what's the thinking in Paramaribo around hyper-local strategy, around, you know, how you build a local market to compensate for the loss of a bigger global market?
Well, I don't know whether the thinking has already developed to address a massive question is that. I think most of us are still reeling from the impact of COVID and the reduction in activities. So I wouldn't be able to speak to that, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, what I'll do is
we as a group involved in Herenstraat, our aim is going to be to discuss among ourselves using the digital means available to discuss among ourselves what, you know, we plan to do and how we're going to try to bring these projects forward. But yeah, the reduced possibilities of meeting people and organizing large gatherings is really going to be a great factor.
Okay, so we'll come back to that question in the next with other panelists. But thank you, Duncan and Paul, very much for that. Let's now move on to talk about the work we've done in Ayacucho. We have Nadia and we have Rosella. And this is a project that we did, which is a bit of a slightly different project. This is much more focused on trying to build the capacity of the local partners to kind of research and understand the impact of cultural and creative activity on the development of the area. So, Rosella, can I hand over to you? Is she there? Rosella? We don't seem to have our person. Any Grace on the technical team? Have we lost connection with Rosella?
We'll check. We're checking right now.
Okay. That's very strange. Thank you for your patience, everybody. Believe me, it'll be worth it when it happens. No? Richard, are you there? Oh, Rosella's connection got disconnected. Okay. Richard, are you there?
I'm here, yeah. I mean, I have the questions.
I think you should just talk to Nadia and we'll just improvise. Is that okay? Nadia, are you there? Looks like Nadia.
Sí, ¿qué tal? Buen día con todos. Muchas gracias por la invitación. No tengo ningún problema de poder ya comenzar con las preguntas que habíamos pensado, ¿no?
Yeah. Well, we've done a little bit of preparation. Maybe if you could just, without the intervention of Rosella, if you could maybe just run through. I mean, basically, I think we were just going to ask you, what's the situation? What did we do with you? And what's come out of the work we've done together?
Sí, claro. Básicamente contarles un poquito sobre Ayacucho, ¿no? y cuáles son los principales desafíos que hemos enfrentado, ¿no? en el desarrollo de las industrias culturales y creativas en la región. Contarles que Ayacucho se encuentra en el sur de la Sierra Central peruana, a una altitud promedio de 2.761 metros sobre el nivel del mar. Ayacucho es la capital de la provincia de Huamanga, ciudad que acoge a 220.000 habitantes, de los cuales el 46% tiene el quechua como lengua materna, ¿no? Asimismo, contarles que Ayacucho es un espacio de encuentro entre la diversidad cultural, la creatividad artística y la biodiversidad que ha permitido el florecimiento de importantes festividades como el Carnaval, la Semana Santa. Asimismo, cuenta con una herencia patrimonial histórica, material e inmaterial, donde se ha desarrollado una extensa gama de expresiones de las artesanías y el arte popular, además del desarrollo de las emergentes industrias culturales y creativas que hoy en día representan nuestra identidad cultural regional, ¿no? Pero también es importante saber que Ayacucho fue la ciudad peruana más afectada por el terrorismo de los años 80. Hay grandes brechas sociales y económicas, tenemos una infraestructura aún deficiente y una débil promoción turística, ¿no? Sin embargo, Ayacucho ha desarrollado en el 2018 el Plan Provincial de Cultura que abarca del 2018 al 2030, que es la primera política pública, ¿no? que es de suma importancia para el desarrollo de las industrias culturales, pero también ha obtenido recientemente el apoyo y la mirada de grandes instituciones como el Banco Interamericano de Desarrollo, la UNESCO, el Fondo de Desarrollo Sostenible, ¿no? Es importante reconocer que la cultura y las industrias creativas son ahora reconocidas como un fuerte motor de desarrollo socioeconómico y territorial, donde a menudo se ha convertido en el centro de las estrategias de revitalización urbana y comunitaria. Sin duda, Ayacucho tiene un gran potencial como centro de turismo cultural y de las industrias culturales y creativas, ya que tiene una gran amplitud y diversidad de la oferta cultural y el potencial comercial sin explotar, ¿no? de muchos de sus sectores creativos, como el sector artesanal. Hacen que sea caso de un estudio muy interesante que el turismo cultural y las industrias creativas podrían desarrollarse y reforzarse mutuamente, ¿no? alimentando una gran ola duradera de innovación y cambio positivo para la ciudad y sus habitantes. Sin embargo, hay una débil inversión y se presta poco apoyo al desarrollo de las ICC. Por ello es importante que los encargados de la formulación de políticas públicas y organismos e instituciones financiadoras puedan ver cómo sus recursos contribuyen a generar un impacto económico positivo para la economía local. Esto significaría que debemos desarrollar métodos fiables para medir el impacto económico de las ICC y el turismo cultural. Desafortunadamente, nada de esto existe actualmente en Ayacucho, por lo cual este proyecto que se ha desarrollado con Bob Consulting sobre la metodología de investigación piloto para cubrir esta laguna, trabajando con actores locales para adaptarlos a métodos internacionales de evaluación del impacto económico de las ICC y al particular de Ayacucho, ¿no? Esto sería un poco hablar sobre el contexto en el que estamos ahorita en Ayacucho y cómo a través de estos proyectos podemos canalizar un adecuado desarrollo, ¿no? del turismo cultural y del desarrollo de las industrias culturales y creativas acá.
Hola Nadia, disculpe, no estaba ya. ¿Todos me oyen? Hello everyone, I'm going to speak in Spanish. Me llamo Rosella y llevo trabajando con Bob unos 6 años y he colaborado con Richard en el piloto de Ayacucho. Hemos visitado Ayacucho en febrero, donde tuve el placer de conocer el equipo del BID y luego, por supuesto, la maravillosa gente de Ayacucho. Con Nadia vamos a tener una breve conversación sobre el piloto de Ayacucho. Disculpe para la conexión. Yo oigo que Nadia ha ya introducido un poquito lo que hemos hecho en Ayacucho, los desafíos de la pequeña pero hermosa ciudad de Ayacucho, que tiene mucho que ofrecer, pero todavía hay unos problemas de infraestructura importante, hay un potencial de las industrias creativas y culturales que ha sido reconocido por la UNESCO. Ayacucho ahora es ciudad creativa, hace parte del network de Creative Cities del UNESCO. Sin embargo, hay muchos otros elementos que se están desarrollando. Entonces, una pregunta por Nadia hoy es, ¿cómo pueden nos hablar un poquito del desarrollo en general en Ayacucho y de cómo las industrias creativas, en particular nosotros hemos trabajado mucho sobre el sector artesanal, se pueden inserir adentro del desarrollo más general en Ayacucho, por ejemplo, a nivel de infraestructura, de calles, de transporte?
Sí, bien, como lo mencionaba, en realidad Ayacucho todavía tiene varias deficiencias, ¿no? En cuanto a la planificación urbanística, en cuanto a las políticas públicas, ¿no? Que tengan la participación ciudadana, que tiene que ser más activa para la elaboración de planes, proyectos sostenibles, mejorar nuestras infraestructuras también turísticas, ¿no? Lo cual ha hecho que todavía sea poco visibilizado, ¿no? Por las grandes empresas nacionales del turismo, ¿no? Y esto permitiría además que nosotros crezcamos también, ¿no? Como sociedad, crezcamos también económicamente.
Perfecto, muchas gracias, Nadia. No sé si has ya hecho un pequeño resumen a los participantes y invitados de lo que hicimos para abordar un poquito los desafíos del sector creativo y cultural con el team del BID y de BOP.
Sí, gracias, Rosela. Durante el desarrollo del taller de Industrias Creativas y Turismo Cultural que tuvimos justamente con Bob Consulti, con Rosela y con Richard, observamos lo importante que es pasar de la ausencia de datos a un conjunto completo de datos económicos para que las ICC sea una gran empresa muy significativa, ¿no? En Ayacucho. En consecuencia, se decidió ensayar métodos experimentales para el subconjunto de actividades que proporcionan métodos transferibles, que puedan entenderse con el tiempo y se puedan transferir al resto del sector. En particular, nos centramos en dos subsectores, ¿no? El potencial económico de la expansión del turismo cultural en Ayacucho, centrado inicialmente en las dos principales festividades, ¿no? El Carnaval y la Semana Santa, y cómo este se conjuga con el patrimonio material e inmaterial de la ciudad, y el segundo, con el potencial de las industrias culturales y creativas para apoyar a los empleos y los medios de vida locales. En el caso inmediato, se está relacionando con la artesanía, ¿no? Ya que de las 19 líneas artesanales que se practican en el Perú, 16 se practican acá en Ayacucho, siendo esto clave para el producto turístico de Ayacucho, que ya es de renombre nacional, ¿no? Y tiene algunos reconocimientos internacionales. Junto con el equipo de Bob Consult, llevamos a cabo 2 talleres que buscan producir una primera metodología para captar el impacto económico del turismo cultural y de las industrias creativas. Los talleres contenían tanto un codiseño como un elemento de capacitación para ayudarnos a trabajar colectivamente para encontrar soluciones realistas y eficaces que respondan a los desafíos locales de Ayacucho. Asimismo, con el equipo y los otros actores locales, identificamos los siguientes puntos como datos y la información más útiles que podrían recogerse en futuros ejercicios de investigación, ¿no? Como, ¿cuál es el impacto económico del turismo cultural en Ayacucho? ¿Cuál es el impacto económico de las industrias creativas y cómo nos comparamos con otras ciudades? ¿Cuántas personas están empleadas desde la cultura, desde las industrias creativas? ¿Qué tamaño tiene cada uno de estos subsectores? ¿Quiénes son los principales actores locales en cada subsector? ¿Quiénes fuera de las industrias culturales y creativas quieren colaborar con el sector? ¿Cuánto está invirtiendo el gobierno en la cultura y cómo se compara con otras ciudades? ¿Qué buscan los turismos en una experiencia en Ayacucho? Son más o menos lo que hemos visto dentro del trabajo en los talleres con Bob Consult. Hola.
Okay, I think we might have lost Rosella again. Yeah, so, okay, so Nadia.
Sí, Sí, les escucho.
Thank you very much for that. I think we've got some sense of the situation and the opportunities there, and I think there's also it's also useful to hear about the process that we engaged with you so far. But I think we're going to move on to the next section of the presentation. So thank you very much. But I wondered whether or not before I move on, you wanted to answer the question that was asked by Javier Edwards earlier on in the chat, which is really, what's your thinking at the moment in Ayacucho about tourism and how to re-gear tourism strategies for the COVID age, much more focused on local audiences? What's your thinking?
Sin duda, el impacto del COVID-19 ha golpeado duramente al sector cultural del Perú en general, ¿no? Por las razones ya expuestas. Pero lo que también nos ha demostrado la fragilidad de la gobernanza y la casi inexistencia de políticas públicas acá en la región, ¿no? Que protejan, salvaguarden a los portadores de la cultura. Sin embargo, el Perú, al ser tan rico y variado en las diversas expresiones culturales, también se ha fortalecido a través de diversas redes, ¿no? Justo en esta pandemia, ¿no? Del COVID-19. Nunca antes sentía el sector más vivo, más presente. Eso es irónico, ¿no? Porque es como que se han reinventado, han hecho cosas nuevas, ¿no? Les pongo un ejemplo, que tenemos acá en Ayacucho una población de Sarwa que trabaja artesanías en tablas pintadas, por eso se le llaman las tablas de Sarwa, que dibujan iconografías costumbristas de su región, ¿no? Sin embargo, a raíz de esta pandemia han creado unas mascarillas faciales con dibujos de Sarwa, ¿no? Entonces, lo que ha permitido que esta población sea todavía más reconocida, más visibilizada, incluso antes de la pandemia, ¿no? Asimismo, ha habido funciones online de canto, música, teatro, ¿no? Sentí como el desarrollo de la cultura también nos ha unido, ¿no? Nos ha vuelto más comunitarios. Por ello, me atrevería a decir que sin duda las industrias creativas y culturales juegan un papel importantísimo, no solo en el desarrollo económico y social de las comunidades, sino también como un soporte a la salud mental, emocional, ante las diversas adversidades, ¿no? Que se nos presentan.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that. I think your comments there just about the fundamental problems of just survival in this crisis and the need for everyone to work together and for government support is something I'm sure that everybody feels very strongly. Anyway, we're now going to move on to part 3 of our webinar, where we have 3 guest speakers from different parts of the world. We're going to try and bring a sort of more regional, maybe global perspective to the conversation. I'm going to introduce them sort of now, and then I think the order is going to be, we're going to start off with Maria Claudia Lopez, who's the former Culture Secretary of Bogota, very heavily involved in what's now a very well-known project, the Bronx Project, right in the center of the city. We're then going to ask Joseph Fleury Bertillon to talk about Quartier des Spectacles, which I have to confess is my own personal favorite project in the whole world. And then finally, Donald Hislop, who's going to talk a little bit about a part of London called Bankside. But it's very interesting. I think we're going to start off just with before I ask Maria Claudia some questions, we're going to start off with a video about the Bronx Project. But it's interesting, Maria Claudia, I'm going to come back to you after that, about that, with that specific question that's come through from Earl Bailey about how you involve the informal elements of the economy in the regeneration process, because of course the story of the Bronx Project is really about trying to deal in a fairly systematic way with some of the problems of the informal economy, if you like. But let's show the video first, Lizzie, and then we'll open up the chat.
Bogotá, capital de Colombia. nuestra casa. En pleno corazón de la ciudad y a solo 6 cuadras del Palacio de Nariño, hasta hace poco tiempo existió una zona conocida como el Bronx, una república independiente del crimen en la que la policía no podía entrar, un lugar en el que durante 2 décadas gobernó la delincuencia con total impunidad. Pero a veces basta solo una decisión para cambiar el rumbo. El 28 de mayo de 2016, el alcalde lideró un operativo sin precedentes en el que la ciudad recuperó el control de esta zona. Más de 1.600 personas fueron rescatadas y atendidas con servicios sociales y de salud. Las estructuras criminales fueron desarticuladas. Todo esto sin víctimas y sin heridos. Pero, ¿qué hace una ciudad con las ruinas de un territorio con el estigma del Bronx? Decidimos creer en lo imposible. Porque creemos en el poder transformador de la cultura y la creatividad. Porque creemos que es con la gente que se cambia la esencia de un lugar. Así que soñamos en grande y decidimos que aquí nacería el primer distrito creativo de Bogotá. Pero, ¿cómo explicar algo que aún no existe? ¿Cómo enamorar a los bogotanos de algo con el nombre Bronx? Abriendo las puertas a la creatividad, dándole nueva vida al espacio, llevando a la gente a bailar, invitando a los niños a jugar, llenando un lugar de amor, risas y música. Durante el 2018, más de 27.000 personas visitaron el Bronx para asistir a 30 eventos donde exhibimos lo mejor de la creatividad de Bogotá, en moda, música, teatro, arte y deportes. La gente comenzó a hablar del nuevo Bronx, no solo en Colombia, sino en el resto del mundo, y hoy el proyecto comienza a verse como un referente de procesos de transformación urbana a través de la creatividad y la cultura. A la fecha, el Bronx Distrito Creativo ha recibido más de 1.300 propuestas de emprendimientos creativos que quieren hacer parte del proyecto, lo que representa una demanda de más de 600% de los metros cuadrados que estarán disponibles, demostrando que Bogotá es el motor creativo de Colombia. En Bogotá creemos que la creatividad puede cambiar el mundo, porque una ciudad que es capaz de transformar el Bronx en un distrito creativo es una ciudad en la que todo es posible. Esa es la ciudad que estamos construyendo.
Great. Thank you. Let's switch on to Maria Claudia then, shall we? Is that okay?
Bogotá, capital.
Just ask you. I don't think we need to go through those images in detail now, but let's just, can I just ask Maria Claudia a couple of questions? Is she coming onto the screen? I can't see her. No? Grace, have we got Maria Claudia? Have we lost her?
No, I'm here. Hello, Paul.
You're there. Oh, fantastic.
Yeah,
great.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you for that. I just want to ask you, just because we've had this very, I apologize for that terrible noise in my office. We've had this very specific question from Earl Bailey, who I think is Jamaica, about how you deal with, he called the informal elements of the economy, including organized crime. Obviously, what's happened in Bogotá with this situation is you've taken fairly draconian measures to kind of remove that. But is that something that, is that a question for you in Bogotá? How you deal with that more informal side, and what have you done about that? So.
Yeah, of course, it is, because the informal economy at the Bronx, the zone of the city, is the main economy that is present in the zone. So we have to deal a lot with that. And even because if you saw in the video, it was for many years zone crime. Even the police could even not come inside. So we have to do a lot of work with the social security sectors and the police, and also at the national level. I wanted to explain just a little bit about the size and the importance of the project. And as we said, since the majority of the people that is present in the webinar the people are involved in Latin American projects, I'm going to give some information in Spanish. So, esta es una pieza urbana de 3.92 hectáreas, el Bronx Distrito Creativo, que hace parte de una operación urbana de renovación urbana mucho más amplia, que tiene no solamente conectores como una línea del metro que va a estar allí, también incluye más de 3.700 viviendas que se van a construir, usos de salud, de comercio, edificios institucionales como una de las alcaldías locales de los mártires que va a estar allí y una sede del SENA. El SENA es el Servicio Nacional de Aprendizaje, que está ligado al Ministerio de Trabajo, en donde se van a dar cursos de formación sobre los oficios de las industrias culturales y creativas. En total, en lo que se refiere al Bronx Distrito Creativo, la inversión es de $47 millones. Hay parte de esos recursos que aún no se han ejecutado, pero que lo van a hacer para toda la parte de renovación de los edificios patrimoniales. Ustedes ven allí en las fotos las actividades que se han hecho para activar. Son actividades, la mayor parte de ellas temporales, pero quisiera hablar sobre la fotografía del lado derecho superior, que sí ven ustedes unos talleres de colaboración entre las personas que están de la comunidad. Son en su mayoría vendedores informales. Hay un comercio de repuestos automotrices en el sector y de comercio mayorista que se han involucrado al proyecto. Y un tema muy importante que quisiera mencionar es que esto no es economía informal, pero es importante mencionarlo, son los habitantes de calle que estuvieron en la zona, muchos de ellos drogadictos, sin esperanza, sin futuro. Trabajamos de la mano con ellos para involucrarlos en el proyecto a través de una iniciativa que se llamó Habitar Mis Historias, y es a través de talleres, de formación, de actividades artísticas y culturales, pudimos ver cómo esos habitantes de calle se reunieron y formaron parte de la co-creación del proyecto, igual que los vendedores informales, a través de laboratorios colaborativos, los cuales en este momento de pandemia se están llevando algunas de estas plataformas de manera virtual.
Okay, just let me unmute. Great. So before I move, well, I'm going to come back to you once we've spoken to the others, Maria Claudia, to talk about the question of post-COVID. But I just wanted for you to describe to us, you know, one of the key lessons is this business of working in a sort of top-down and bottom-up way, and I think you've described some of that. I'm interested, there's obviously a very, very lively, significant cultural and creative element, not just the way you're animating the public spaces, but the businesses you mentioned, and it's clearly going to be a key part of the economy of that place. How do you involve the creative industries, the cultural and creative industries? How do you get them really, really engaged with the development? What are the vehicles and the mechanisms you use for that?
Bueno, sí, efectivamente, este es un proyecto que es básicamente, como es una iniciativa del gobierno local y está 100% financiado a la fecha con recursos públicos, tiene un enfoque top-down, básicamente, pero también hay otras iniciativas que han surgido de proveer espacios de colaboración con la comunidad y con el sector artístico y cultural, en donde ya hay una plataforma donde estas personas por ejemplo, los restaurantes, diseñadores de modas, joyeros, artistas, un ejemplo, se va en el mes de abril a llevar a cabo la Feria del Millón, que es de artistas emergentes en la ciudad, es una feria muy grande a nivel de ciudad, se va a llevar a cabo en el Bronx de manera virtual. En este momento, a partir del 1 de agosto, ya está el llamado a los artistas para que quieran participar en esta feria para presentar sus propuestas. Entonces hay una serie de ecosistemas que se unen allí desde las industrias culturales y creativas para no solamente activar el sitio temporalmente para lo que viene, sino también se está construyendo en este momento una visión, un modelo público-privado para poder operar lo que será la semilla de este sitio. Ustedes ven en la fotografía inferior izquierda, hay unos edificios patrimoniales que incluso están catalogados como patrimonio nacional. Por eso también toda la coordinación con el gobierno nacional y entre las distintas entidades del gobierno local. Muy importante es que esas instancias de colaboración y participación y colaboración se hayan establecido para poder manejar todo el proyecto.
Thank you. I think there's a specific question for you in the chat there. Is this area also a UNESCO World Heritage Site? Because I would like to know how the plans to build houses or artist space in the area integrate with the built heritage. You see that?
Is the question in the chat about the informal que se refieren a las bandas organizadas?
It's a different question. It's about, is this a UNESCO World Heritage Site?
No, it isn't. No, it is classed at the national level. It's on the nation heritage list. One of the buildings, the one that you see on the screen at the left side, on the part of the screen. Yeah, but it's not a World Heritage Site.
Okay. And then they would like to know how the plans to build houses or artist spaces in the area integrate with the built heritage. Well, you've talked a little bit about that, haven't you?
Sí, hablé que esta pieza de 3.92 hectáreas está inserta en un proyecto, en una pieza de ciudad de renovación urbana, se llama Plan Parcial La Estanzuela, el Voto Nacional, y es allí en donde se van a construir viviendas, va a haber renovación urbana a una escala más amplia, va a llegar una línea de metro detrás del edificio que ustedes ven en la pantalla, que es el antiguo batallón de reclutamiento del ejército, va a haber comercio, va a haber también un puesto de salud, una especie de hospital en la zona, pero básicamente la pieza del Bronx Distrito Creativo está compuesta por los 2 edificios que se ven en las fotos, que son patrimoniales, están en la lista nacional, y también por la sede de la Alcaldía Local de los Mártires y la sede del SENA, en donde se va a impartir formación. Este va a ser el primer centro de formación que va a atender oficios relacionados con las industrias culturales y creativas y que forma parte del ecosistema de todo el distrito creativo.
Okay, great. Thank you for that.
Perdón,
folks,
Paul, las
looks like we're running out of time.
Las viviendas van a ser construidas después, en una fase posterior.
Okay, thank you for that. We're, as always with these things, we're running out of time. We got 2 more people to sort of bring forward. I just want to quickly move on to Joseph Fleury. And Joseph's just going to describe to us briefly this extraordinary phenomenon they have in Montreal. It's kind of like a massive sort of public, civic, cultural, creative space, which I think is a huge inspiration to many people around the world. But Joseph, over to you.
Hello, hi everybody. So I'll start. Is it okay? Can you hear me? Or? Okay.
Yeah, good.
So I start with a brief description of the district. So the Quartier des Spectacles, which means El Distrito de los Espectáculos, is located in the eastern part of downtown Montreal, next to the business district, the Old Montreal, and the Old Port. So it's part of the downtown. The territory covers 1 square kilometers with more than 80 cultural venues, including 30 concert halls. The district is made of 8 public spaces where 40 festivals take place all year round, but especially during the summer. All the major festivals present simultaneously a free outdoor programming and a paying indoor programming as well in the different concert halls in the district. So the indoor attendance for the cultural performances in 2018 was about 1.7 million of tickets sold. So it's pretty much 25% of the total of ticket sales in the province of Quebec. Before to continue, let's take a look back at the genesis of the project. So the district from the 20s to the 40s was mainly famous for being the Montreal red light district during the Prohibition era. So it was very famous for its cabarets, musicals, prostitution, drugs. It was the Sin City and the city of pleasures. So it was, it gained a bad reputation and was badly seen by the authorities of Montreal. So in the 50s, the city administration entered into a big urban renewal and cleanup regeneration project of the downtown. This transformation was based on mega projects, the construction of big institutions, highways, etc. So it led to physical fragmentation of the territory with several vacant parcels and parking lots. But these vacant parcels will become home to a number of outdoor festivals. So in 2003, the city create the Quartier des Spectacles partnership with it, which is a not-for-profit organization. And the mandate was to manage the area and to federate the different cultural actors around urban development project. So then with this first mandate, we had to contribute to the creation of the vision of the district itself, along with the city administration, stakeholders, cultural actors. The idea was not to create a new cultural district, but to enhance and to improve the existing cultural assets of the former red light districts and to name this district, so the Quartier des Spectacles. In 2007, the three levels of government, so the city administration, provincial and federal, they agreed on a major plan to transform these vacant lots into new public spaces. So the main goal was to ensure available spaces for the major festivals in downtown that were fearing a real estate pressure of the private development. So the festivals at that time and the other cultural actors were actively lobbying since 2003, and the project has the political validation only 4 years later. So there was an urban planning special program issued by the city. So it was to imagine the district as a big outdoor concert hall available for all the promoters by providing them permanent plug and play facilities, technological infrastructures, specifically designed to be adapted for the needs of the promoter. The aim is to provide a customizable public space for a particular event to another one. So the Place des Festivals, the one you saw just before with the fountains, is the iconic public space that illustrates the technologically integrated outdoor space to host these big events with specific design urban facilities that are the unique identity of the district. So at terms, more than 200 millions of Canadian dollars will have been invested by the three levels of government. So the main challenge for us as a lobbying organization as well at the beginning, the main challenge was to convince the public funders to invest in a culture-led project that will generate social and economic benefits. So culture has been progressively but strongly recognized as a tool of development all along the evolution of the district and the development of the project itself. And I think the challenge was successfully completed if we look at the real estate related economic benefits of 2.2 billion of Canadian dollars in 10 years. So instead of the projected benefits that was made by the city of 1.5 billion in 15 years. So the mandate today of the partnership is to enrich, preserve the cultural assets, notably those related to the performing arts indoor and outdoor, is to program cultural activities in addition to the existing offers, which are mainly the big events and festivals, and manage the public spaces and specialized facilities used for these cultural activities. And one other aspect of the mandate is to illuminate the district with architectural lighting, video projections, lighting identity projected on the ground. And the last one is to promote and develop the district as the heart of Montreal, as an international touristic destination. So to achieve its goals, the partnership must work constantly in a collaborative environment involving a bunch of different actors, inhabitants of the public spaces, residents, retailers, private and public stakeholders, and the marginalized populations that are part of the downtown in every big cities of the world. So we have the same problem as everywhere. And the approach was to involve this marginalized population in a big process of consulting for different placemaking projects. And one of these projects is called Les Jardins Gamelin. It's a community-based project that is the result of this exercise of placemaking, involving the police, the politicians, the community workers, the homeless people, the marginalized people, and they were really taken to a part of this process. And the last challenge I would say we have, especially in Montreal, because in winter the weather is pretty cold. So we had the challenge to animate the public spaces during the winter at -40 degrees, for example. So one of the answers were to create a special contest that result in the production of interactive digital light installations each year. So these installations are presented during the winter. And since 2014, the partnership started an exportation project of these installations. And today we have 10 in-house productions that are constantly touring all around the world and became a new source of autonomous funding for the organization. So the last point is this project of touring our productions created some relationships with international partners as co-producer of these installations or as only a partner to exchange good practices, especially with the GCDN. The Global Cultural District is one of the main cultural district network active in the world, and the partnership is involved since the beginning of the creation of this structure, and it's a great opportunity to exchange good practices and so on. So
okay,
thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I'd like to ask you a few questions, but I think we're a bit short of time, so I might just leave it to one, then we'll come back to you because I want to ask all three of you a question about post-COVID and tourism. But so this is an extraordinary project to me, just because it's a basically an infrastructure project. It's about completely changing the public realm and the space in the center of the city. And what you've described is that you have a special organization that effectively programs the space. It's like a cultural producer, isn't it? That basically programs the space, working with lots of other organizations in the city. Can you just describe that a bit more about how you involve all the different parts of the city in making that space feel as though it's theirs and as though they can identify with it and benefit from it?
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
Just wanted you to describe how you make sure you engage with all parts of the city so that they benefit from and can participate in the activities of the quartier.
Yeah, basically it's pretty much always the same process. We consult the partners, the different levels of decision. Basically, our first source of funding is the city of Montreal. So we do collaborate with them, but we are totally independent on how we spend the funding. So it's more more protocol. But with all the other partners, we support, for example, we support the cultural and creative industries. We are part of an association that link these different enterprises together, and we propose them to work in a co-opetition way and not a competition way. So to work together, and we're kind of a broker. We are here to make links, to federate, to mobilize, and it's not only with the cultural sector, it's with the business sector, with the universities. We develop some programs with Interactive Media Center, and we involve them to use the district as an experimentation ground, so as a laboratory. So we invite them to use the district as it was there.
Okay, great. Okay, fine. So let's move on to Donald Hislop. I want to talk a little about Bankside. Are you there, Donald?
Yep. Yep. So hello.
Listen. We're running out of time.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And I know you quite well, don't I?
Yeah, I'll do this really quick.
So, just 5 minutes or so, and then we can have a bit more of a discussion. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah,
I'm just going to do a little bit of introduction before you start, just for the audience to understand. So Donald's got a really interesting job as he works for the Tate Modern, which I suppose is one of the top 3 contemporary art galleries in the whole world. But it's the top one, of course. But actually what he does is he does revitalization. His job is to make sure that iconic cultural institution is a catalyst for the revitalization of the area it's in. And he's done some really interesting pioneering work. Sadly, we don't have time to go in detail, but just give us a snapshot of what you've done in Bankside, which is the area around the Tate Modern.
Good. Well, thank you. And hello. And one of the advantages of going last, of course, is that a lot has already been said, and I'm not going to repeat it, but just to say, I reiterate a lot of the values and principles that people have been talking about, and the common and diverse ways that we're working. And I was also involved in these pilots. I went to Panama, and I was involved virtually in Surinam. And I would just say the work that Maru is doing in Panama City is absolutely crucial. And that school in El Chorrillo, the people running that school at the moment deserve a medal. They are running in unbelievable circumstances before COVID. I saw it. And if somehow a Recreatus or a cultural and creative centre can be established in partnership with that school, it could make the absolute world of difference to that part of the city, and it would make a lot of the things that we're talking about in the theory tangible. So I really do hope that project comes to bear. I'll talk a little bit about my work in London. I've worked quite a lot in Latin America as well, and it is a long way away and it's a different context, but I do think lots of the values and principles that we talk about are absolutely the same because they're people centered. And I'm talking about a particular area of London called Bankside. Actually, it has something in common with the other two examples because this was the red light district, the illegal gambling and the underworld of London. But 600 years ago, when Shakespeare was alive, this was where the informal activity happened outside the formal city. And that sort of wild and anarchistic heritage is something that we try and retain the spirit of when we think about this part of the city and how it's evolved to the present day. But the present day project has been a 25-year project so far, so only a generational period, but a major change in this part of the city from a rundown post-industrial part of London to something, to a reimagination, a reinvention of that part of the city with culture and food at its core. If you go on to the next slide, it's not a huge area of the city, but it has seen huge growth over the last 25 years, really driven by about £500 million of public and private investment into culture, being Tate Modern, the museum, which has happened in 2 stages with some other cultural facilities around it, and the reinvention of a very historic food market in the area. Those have been the drivers for a whole transformation, market driven, because most of the land is privately owned around it. But culture and creativity has been the stimulus. And for instance, that £500 million has generated billions and billions more of direct and indirect economic development into the city. It's not all been a success story. It's come at a cost, and still comes at some sort of cost with gentrification and before COVID, contradictions happening within the city. But overall, and one of the reasons I think it's been relatively successful is, if you go to the next slide, it's been driven by some of the things that Paul was talking about. It's been about political leadership. It's been about public and private investment. It's been about political will that we heard from in Bogota, but primarily it's been driven through partnership with the public, with local actors in many forms. And it's been about a set of dialogues and partnerships, creative and practical. And it's been very much about evolving and bringing together this part of the city through the creative function, but also as a place that people live, people work and do business, and increasingly 6 to 15 million people coming as tourists to the area. So we talk about ecosystem a lot. This is a social ecosystem, and we have a social model that determines how we try to manage that, driven through dialogue and partnership. That doesn't mean we agree all the time. We don't. There's lots of disagreements, but it's the idea of having the networks and the neural pathways of dialogue open to deal with the way that you develop an area. If you go to the next slide. Just a couple of examples. Our approach to the development of the public realm of the area, it's quite a dense part of the city. Most of the residents living in apartment blocks, not a huge amount of open space. Instead of a master plan, we started off looking at master plans for the area. We've changed and evolved that a master plan is an old-fashioned idea, monolithic, usually driven by the vision of a man, an architect usually, one person. We've changed that and we've developed the idea of the urban forest. It's not an actual forest, it's metaphorical, but we look at values and principles which guide us in the vision for developing the area in the public realm and its community uses. We look at it as a series of rivers and streams and interventions, whether that's a very big landscape onto the river walkway to bring tourists in, or for a child to plant a window box in their apartment. It's delivered by a series of values and principles which helps people think about the development of the area and be part of that area. If you go on to the next slide. That's helped us continue to think about how we develop the economic and social benefit of the area. So you can see the river in this slide, the Tate and the market are both adjacent to the river, and they've been driving a ribbon of economic development and wealth along the river. We've increasingly looked how to connect back into the south of the city. Not on that map, there are quite large areas of social deprivation in a city like London, and we want to connect the creative and culturally driven economic wealth to the south. So there are a number of new projects, including the Low Line, which we're using, which is the stimulation of railway arches across the city with creative and cultural use. The next slide. And we're underpinning that with trying to introduce different thinking about how we use the city. The real estate value in this part of London and in our city centres is absolutely huge, but we've chosen to turn part of our site into a park. It's about using the value of land as a social value as well as financial value, looking at alternatives for the use in the city. I was involved in a project in Buenos Aires in Barrio 31, where again, we're talking about those things. These are the sort of dialogues that culture can lead, thinking about not just the value of land and its money, but in a social sense. And the last slide. And I think a lot of you have talked about this, and we continue to try and think about social development around dialogue, partnership, co-production of communities, co-production of facilities, co-creation of new projects. And in the reality we're living in at the moment with COVID, where people are scared to come into city centres, people are not coming to museums and galleries, it is the social element of all of these things that we've talked about that I think will give us the seeds of recovery, of innovation, and of the reinvention of our cities. So that social element for me is the absolutely fundamental thing to what we've been talking about today. Thank you.
Great. That was a model of conciseness, Donald. Thank you very, very much. Okay, just to let everyone know that I'm going to run over by about 5 minutes, just so that we can have a brief discussion now, since we've taken the trouble to bring these brilliant people together. I hope you don't mind, because what I want to do is I just want to round off. We could ask so many more questions, very rich examples. I just want to ask the panelists answer basically 2 questions, and just go around in turn. And when they answer the questions, I want them to think about what people can take away from this webinar, just practical advice to the people who are sitting, because you've all got such interesting experiences. Now, what I want to do is I want to take, I'm going to come to the question about post-COVID hyperlocal strategies in a minute, but I want to just take a question that's come in from Esperanza Boydeuch. Hello, Esperanza. Got to know her last year, a great pleasure. And I think it's a core question that you come back to every single time. We've touched on in this webinar a few times, but it's a core question that you come back to every single time when you talk about revitalization and cultural revitalization, which is essentially, how do you really get long-term, deep engagement with the local community. And what I wanted to ask each of the three of you is, what's, just based on your experience of your project, what you've been doing over the last few years, what's the secret, what's the key to genuine long-term community engagement in your experience? Joseph, let's go with you first.
Hi. How to engage a long-term community-based project? Is that the question?
Yes. How do you get that engagement? So it's not just superficial. It's not just on paper. It's actually real engagement.
Yeah. Really, I think I said it before, but I think at some point, if it's possible, you have to co-design as much as possible the project that involves a certain amount, a certain population, or some specific actors. If it's only the old approach of a blueprint project and you just show them the finished product, for our own experience, it's not working anymore. So if you want to engage the people, to involve, you have to involve them earlier in the process of co-designing the project. It's not easy. It's very complex, but it's a great challenge, and it became an approach of working with the people.
Okay. So you have to basically go all the way back to the beginning and start from the very, very beginning. That's a very good practical piece of advice. Maria Claudia.
Yes, I fully agree with what has been said, because since the very, very, very beginning, you have to take into account multiple voices, everyone's voices, to co-create, to co-design. It's just not to inform them about the project, the challenges, what is going to be done. Is a real involvement means that you have to take into account what they think, what they said, how they see everything. So work in a collaborative way is, for me, the success. And it has to be implemented since the very beginning. I just mentioned the case of homeless people that were in the Bronx area. Many of them were criminals, drug dealers and everything. And we engaged them. Not everyone, of course, but we reached to engage them in the project. And then they, what they think, for example, was an artistic fair where they could exhibit their works, and they were proud of it. And they seemed to be very, very proud and honored to be part of the project, because in fact, they were part of the project.
Okay. Right. Donald.
Three things. I think I agree with most of what people have said. Firstly, it's long term. It's part of the DNA of what you do. You can't stop and start it, and nobody has all the answers, and we shouldn't pretend that we've got the answers. It's an iterative process. And I mean, we are talking now to the children of people we were talking to at the start of the process. So, you know, it's long term and it's ongoing. Bringing people together in forums. I mean, one of the things that IDB have been looking at is business improvement districts. Well, we have a business improvement district in Bankside, which has the businesses, but also has the community, has the cultural organizations. It's a one-stop shop for thinking about the area and about how you use financial and creative resources. And I think increasingly through the digital, one of the disappointments I've had with COVID and the cultural industry's response has been the dialogue through digital has been passive. It's just been giving people information. Interesting. But what is the dialogue using the digital about ownership of cultural districts, ownership of creative organizations, and how people can actually really have some sort of say in how those resources and assets are made for more value for the areas that we're in. And that's the big challenge, I think, to continue the community dialogue now.
Right, thank you. Okay, and we're going to close with, I guess it's kind of like the $64,000 question, which is the post-COVID question, which was asked earlier on by Javier Edwards. I'll read it out to you, actually, because I think it's very nicely put. Do the panelists think it will be necessary to redistribute the weight that has been given to tourism, whether cultural or not, and that these sectors becoming self-sustaining ecosystems and from which tourism can be nurtured, but not at their service? It's basically a question, you know, given the fact that for the foreseeable future there's going to be such a drop in tourism as we know it, what are the post-COVID strategies we're adopting to attract more local audiences, I guess? Have you got examples? Maybe just finish off by giving us one or two examples of what you're doing in your area. Joseph, let's go with you.
Yeah, I don't have like specific examples for the area because we, the government, the provincial government developed a relaunch plan, sanitary plan for the whole touristic industry with some subsector of the touristic industries. So I can share you if you want. I have it an English version. So it's very specific to, it's case by case from a subsector of the touristic industry to another one, and from a region to another one, depending of the evolution of the pandemic. So it's changing very fast. It's very uncertain. So it's pretty hard to answer this question. But I will share the plan of the touristic industry here, if you want.
So basically, it's a kind of like a broad strategy that's been developed with between the sector and the government.
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah. And it came from the actors of the touristic industry themselves. They proposed, they made their own proposition to the government, to the different.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'd love to see that. Please do share that with us. That'd be very useful. I think quite practical. Maria Claudia.
Okay. In the Bronx case, the challenge is to focus on local community, because since it was a place that most people in Bogota didn't know because it was inaccessible because of the crime and everything, many people in Bogota are discovering this place. So the main visitors are local visitors. So we have to work to continue working on that. And we have to establish some virtual platforms that are already in place to allow the local participation. And the government, the Bogota's government is developing some incentives for artists at the moment to support their work. And also, as I mentioned, the art fair, a big art fair, is going to be held virtually so people can know the place, because there is not a possibility at the moment to do massive events as it has been done before.
Right. Donald, you're
I think it's, I think it's right. The question, the first world, someone talked about acceleration earlier. The first world model has been exposed here, and particularly around tourism in the city centres. And there's an acceleration of what was happening within city centres anyway in historic cores, which was they were becoming silos. And that's been accelerated. So we do, by necessity, need to look at more to the local, and what Maria said, to the local audiences. I have a terrible trouble with this word hyperlocal. I think it's a buzzword that I don't know where it's come from. Local is local, it's community is community, it's always been there. It's the people who live and work and exist in our cities and around us, and we do need to connect and reconnect with them again. One example, I haven't quite managed to negotiate it yet, but in a place like I operate in, there's going to be less use of office buildings. We've got a huge cultural space. Somebody mentioned before the innovation that we're going to need going forward. A lot of that will come from small business, individuals in the creative and cultural industries. I would like to be opening up spaces like the museum as incubation and host spaces for that recovery. We need to physically and philosophically embrace the rest of the sector and prepare for the recovery. It won't come through exhibitions and collections alone, it will come through something more. This is the time for the partnership.
Fantastic. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Maria Claudia. That's really, really interesting discussion. We could go on. I'm going to start bringing this webinar to a close now. I want to just finish off by just re-emphasizing 3 points I made at the beginning. And I think these points have been very, very brought to life really in the discussion. And that's just, and these are all points that come out in the handbook. Number one, the importance of integrating the activity across the board. So many of the projects we look at are really much bigger than just cultural and creative industries. They're really about, if you like, the social infrastructure and the physical infrastructure of the place. Number two, top-down and bottom-up together. Number three, co-design. Do it together. Find a way of doing it. Joseph just very, very kindly dropped a note about the document he was talking about, which is very useful. We've also actually got a nice visual, the beginnings of a nice visual summary of our discussion from our artist, Raquel Duran. I think she's going to show that to us. You'll get sent a nice copy of this after this webinar, but she's going to show us her work in progress at the moment. Can we share screens with Raquel? Lizzie, is Raquel doing it? I think I've lost Lizzie.
Sorry, I have my phone now working. Yeah, I'm processing it.
It's coming on. Is it coming? Okay, let's here it comes. This is just a little visual summary for everyone at the end. It's a little visual treat. She started screen sharing.
Should be there in a second.
Oh, here we go. That looks like something. Not quite there yet. The suspense is overwhelming. While we're waiting for that to come up, is it working at your end, Raquel? No, that looks. Anyway, while we're waiting for that to come up, even if we don't see it now, we'll certainly send it to you. Is it coming up? While we're waiting for it to come up, I just want to do my thanks. I can't really hear you. We're going to wait for that to come up. I'm just going to say my thank you. So I've already thanked the three speakers in front of us now. Thank you very much, you three, Maria Claudia, Donald, and Joseph. I want to say a special word of thanks to the champions from the pilots from Paramaribo, and Panama City, and just to say to them what a great pleasure and indeed inspiration it's been for us to work with you and your colleagues in your cities. The hope of our cities lies with people like you. And I want to thank my team for the great work they've done preparing for this. And I want to say a special word of thanks to the three people who we work very closely with at the bank. Jesus Navarrete, Isadora Lorraine, and Stephanie Van Doren. It's been great. And that's it. So let's leave that on the screen for people to look at. We're going to send you a copy of this. It looks great. Love the colors. Yeah. You'll all get a copy of this as a sort of aid memoir. Thank you very much, Raquel. So that's basically me closing the webinar. Thank you to all the attendees across the 9 cities. I hope you found it useful. I just wanted to say one quick word to Javier Edwards. I know that no one really answered your question because it's too big a question at the moment, but I'd be very happy to exchange emails with you on that question. I haven't got the headspace at the moment for it, but I'm very happy to open a discussion with you about that. Great. A copy in English, please, as well. That's an interesting idea. I'll hand you back over to Jesus. Jesus.
Gracias. Thank you, Paul. Gracias. Solamente para cerrar esto, agradecerles a todos su participación. Ha sido un evento, un webinar muy interesante. Quiero agradecer también a los ponentes. Han sido, por su generosidad, por compartir todas esas experiencias de unos proyectos realmente importantes e interesantes. A Bob Consulting, obviously. Todo el trabajo que han hecho, fantástico, gran apoyo, excelente haber trabajado con ustedes. A mis colegas, Isidora Larraín, que ha hecho un súper trabajo, súper apoyo, y Stephanie también, que nos ha estado apoyando también, sobre todo en este evento. Último, tenemos la publicación actualizada, se la pueden bajar, ya incluye las nuevas experiencias basadas en los pilotos y también las recomendaciones en el marco de la crisis COVID. Así que con eso queremos darles las gracias a todos y todas y nos vemos en el próximo evento de nuestro programa Patrimonio Vivo. Muchas gracias y gracias de nuevo a todos.